It's 4 years ago this morning since here in New Zealand we woke to the news that Pope Francis had been elected. Many people were delighted at the election, although uncertain, because here was the first Pope from the Southern Hemisphere, the first Pope to be ordained a priest since the Second Vatican Council. There was much that was different about him, and for us in New Zealand he was from our part of the world, our hemisphere. I remember being in the Foursquare store in Cheviot just a year or so after he was elected, and the store is always full of people who are in one conversation because everyone knows everyone else and the tourists are always welcomed. And I was at the front of the queue paying for what I had bought, and someone else in the line realized that I was the priest, and they just called out, they were a tourist from another country, they just called out, "We love Pope Francis." Which is a common reaction. I often wonder what he will be remembered for. Certainly there are many things in his teaching that link him very directly with Pope Benedict before him and with Pope St. John Paul. But I wonder if a key word is the word accompaniment. Let me explain what I mean. That very often there's this idea that the teaching of the Church and the Gospels is far away, well beyond what any of us are easily able to live. It's as if we in the Church continue to present what the Gospel presents, an ideal for Christian living. And here we are living down here. We try to overcome this gap because the gap makes us feel uncomfortable. We try to overcome the gap by our prayer and our commitment, our discipline and our good works, and then we fail again. We try again and we fail. And because we realize that we are powerless to bridge that distance that we may feel between the ideal and the reality of our lives, people often suggest that we need to change this ideal to make this ideal much closer to the reality that we are living. Well, as Catholic Christians, we know that we can't do that because the ideal is not only not ours to change, the ideal is something that we need. Otherwise, we simply move around in this imperfect, struggling reality with no hope of any journey to lead us beyond. Of course, the heart of our faith is that it is God who continues to bridge that gap by coming to us where we are. Pastoral practice has always taken the ideal and without lessening it or compromising it, has engaged with people who are living in the midst of the ordinary, struggling, even sinful reality, but without compromising or changing the ideal. This is what we mean by accompaniment, and Pope Francis has done this superbly, I suggest. What he said is that the goal of the Christian life, the ideals of our way of living in relationship with Christ, are achieved not by a magic sudden encounter for most of us, but by a journey, by a process of growth, a process of allowing the light to gradually shine into our lives more fully so that we become aware of how, not so much of how we want to change, not so much that, but we become aware of the fact that we want to be different, we want to live this relationship, and our desire for the ideal grows. But it's, as Pope Francis so often reminds us, it's a process, it's a goal, and we need to accompany others on this journey. And here's the thing that helps me most to accompany others who are struggling. It's the fact that I'm struggling and that I need to be accompanied myself. Certainly God does this, but the way that God does it most directly for me is through good friends who desire the fullness of life for me, who don't just say to me, "John, whatever you're doing's fine and don't worry about changing, we like you as you are," but people who have a sense of what I, as a human person, as they, are created to be. And so together our friendship becomes a journey, a process of accompanying each other as we grow towards Christ, towards deeper awareness of Christ, and therefore towards the fullness of life.